Ladies and gentlemen, my name is TotalBiscuit. I'm here to ask and answer one simple question. WTF is Warhammer Quest? Well, it's an interpretation of a classic tabletop RPG by Rodeo Games, Twist Play, and Chilled Mouse. Originally, of course, Warhammer Quest was developed by Games Workshop, the folks that made Warhammer, and I am John's complete lack of surprise. And I recall playing this game a long time ago. There was a games club that I used to go to, a tabletop games club when I was like 12 or 13 years old. It was a Friday night down the leisure centre at about 7 o'clock in the evening, and we mostly played Warhammer stuff. Now, not a lot of us could actually afford Warhammer, so there wasn't that much Warhammer going on, but there was quite a lot of Talisman, Necromunda, Blood Bowl, and Warhammer Quest, because they were much more affordable games, and the couple of copies of Warhammer Quest that the Games Club had that you could basically rent out and play while they were constantly in use, because frankly, it was a very accessible tabletop RPG. There weren't that many rules to learn. You could basically buy your own character for a reasonably cheap price and paint it up the way that you wanted to. You could buy these individual character packs with these nice miniatures. And you could jump in and have an adventure, and the character development was pretty good. There was a lot going on with it. Each class was very unique and different, and you could carry your progress between sessions, and it was just a nice visual RPG, whereas pen and paper can be a little bit complicated. This tabletop RPG, well, it had miniatures, it had properly represented tile sets, it had a movement system that was based on those tiles, so it was very compelling. Now, the problem with taking a game like that is similar to the problem that I had with games like Space Hulk, or indeed Talisman Prologue. The fact is that these titles are best played with friends, and the mechanics are perhaps not suited to a computer game. Now, Warhammer Quest, I think, is another title that really proves that, unfortunately. Now, we'll have a quick look at the options menu before we go in. There's not much to see here. Usually I do this later in the video, but there's nothing to look at. I mean, really, you've got resolutions, windowed on and off, blurred on and off language, and 2 sliders. That is it. And honestly, that's all it really needs, with the exception of key bindings, because while they did manage to do mouse control in this game, they seem to forget that we have 100 other buttons on a keyboard that could be used for a variety of different functions. They didn't bother to do that. This game originally came out on iOS, so that probably gives you an indication of what to expect there. Although I've got to admit, I'm pretty impressed that they actually have 16:9 resolutions, because they bloody well forget in most iOS ports. Now, the thing I'd like to show you before we go into the game is additional content, because it's a business model thing. So, the game came out on iOS at $5 and has been, I believe, discounted since. It's $5 at the moment, as I'm recording this video, but on Steam it's $15. Now, you can buy a deluxe edition for $30, which gives you all of the content that you see here. All of that. Now, if you don't buy the deluxe edition, what you get is this. You get the Brutal Tribe, the Hidden Threat, which is a couple of adventure packs which give additional locations and enemies and tile sets. And you also get, I believe, the Vampires and Zombies enemy pack. So you get a bit of content with it, and you'd say, alright, well, hang on a minute. That's 5, so if you add those together, it's 15. Alright, so it's the same as iOS. Yes, but you have to make the argument that that's actually good value in the first place, and I don't think that it is. iOS tends to go for very low entry-level prices and then tax on content which is often disproportionately expensive later on. And that's the same thing that's happening here. But with Steam, they bundled it together and said, well, $15 is your base entry price, which I don't think is necessarily reasonable. I mean, you don't know if you're going to enjoy the game for that long, and on iOS, okay, you don't have to get the Brutal Tribe and the Hidden Threat. You can play the game at $5, and maybe if you really enjoyed it, you can pick these up. But I think the higher price point is something that would drive people away. Not only that, but you have to pay for all of these characters at $3 each. Now, the problem is that the 4 characters they gave you are the 4 most boring that they could possibly find. They gave you, I think, the Grey Wizard. They then gave you 2 kinds of warrior. Like, I think there's a kind of barbarian warrior and there's kind of a dwarfish warrior. And they gave you an archer. And all the cool stuff like Troll Slayer and Shadow Warrior and Warrior Priest and Witch Hunter and Archmage, they're all behind paywalls. And not only that, but there's no way to actually try them out before you purchase them. I have everything here because the review code I was given was a deluxe edition. But if you buy the regular edition, then you're stuck with guessing whether or not you'll actually enjoy these characters, which you might not, unfortunately. And characters take quite a long time to level up in this game, so it may be that you get a character, level it up a bit, and realize, well, that was a waste of money because actually I don't like his playstyle. So I'm not keen on the business model, I'm afraid. I think that a lot of this stuff is way too expensive, and I don't think you can justify the price point. Okay, let's jump into the game and see what's going on with it. You'll notice that there is no multiplayer here or whatsoever. Notice I've played for about 2 hours. Now, bear in mind, I've also put another few hours in on the iOS version, so I've actually played quite a bit more than this. But let's jump in and see what's going on. I know the rule set for Warhammer Quest fairly well. It's been a while since I've played it, so it's not like I don't know what's going on with this game. I mean, for God's sake, I played it over 10 years ago. Okay, so what you've got here is an overworld map which takes you between towns and quests are exactly what you would think. It's a dungeon that you have to run with a few characters. Now, if I jump into the town, there we go, what is going to happen is it's going to show a cutscene every bloody time you enter for some stupid reason. You can skip it, thankfully. And you'll be able to do various things, and sometimes random events occur here, and this is also a bit of a quest hub. So, these are all of the warriors that I have at my disposal. I've got a couple of leveled up characters here. I've got like level 2 Marauder, and I have a level 2 Witch Hunter. A lot of these other guys haven't managed to level up yet. They level up through getting kills for the most part, and also by surviving. If any of these characters die, which is entirely possible during a mission, they don't die permanently unless you're on hardcore mode, but unfortunately, you don't get any experience for them, so that can really hold them back. Now, you can access a market, which will allow you to sell junk, if you so desire, and I certainly will. Let me get rid of that. It would be nice if there was a sell all junk button, as there's a lot of stuff that says, hey, this is a consumable, but says, actually, this has no use whatsoever. You can just sell it. It's like, well, is it a consumable then? Doesn't seem like it. And for some reason, every time you sell something, it goes back to the top of the bloody list. I don't know why that is. It's a tad silly, frankly. Jeez, just giving my middle finger a good bloody workout on the mouse wheel there. Alright, so yeah, you can sell stuff, and you can also buy upgrades. Now, if we go to the inventory screen, you'll see that you can equip 4 common items, 4 uncommon items, and 4 rare items. And as you might imagine, they all kind of have slots on, so if I can't wear 2 helmets at the same time, because that would just be silly. But you get the idea. Fairly basic inventory system, and each class has its own, and you can equip various consumables, potions, and all that kind of stuff. So, nothing really out of the ordinary there, nothing to be particularly surprised about. Now, the level up system, which I can't show you because I don't have a level up available, is also kind of basic, but simultaneously, it adds a lot to the character. The character progression of Warhammer Quest was what was really cool, because each class kind of has its own unique set of progression. Although, the one that was the most interesting, which was the Chaos Warrior, isn't here. It's not in the game. I used to play a Chaos Warrior in Warhammer Quest. It was amazing, because as he leveled up, he could gain a bunch of mutations and become really awesome. And that's not here. So they're missing the most interesting character in Warhammer Quest. So well done, guys. Don't know what the hell you're playing out there. But you level up, and it will give you a random set of stats. So it's dice rolled. It's actually possible for your character to develop much weaker than any other character, which I think, frankly, is a very flawed system. But it's part of the sort of old-school nostalgic charm of Warhammer Quest on tabletop. The problem is that mechanics like that, in 2015, especially on PC, they're not well-liked, and rightfully so. Because if you get your character gimped simply due to random chance, then it's very frustrating. It's some of the same problems that I've got with games like Blood Bowl. They become quite frustrating because there's a lot of dice rolling. And since you're not in that social environment that you would be when you're playing Warhammer Quest on a tabletop, it's nowhere near as tolerable. Alright, so as I said, you can go to things like the training grounds. That will allow you to level up, as I said before. You don't get to pick anything about it. You just gain a bunch of perks and things like that. So my Witch Hunter now has extra abilities. You can also retire a class as well. And the reason you would do this is if you ended up getting gimped up levels and you want to roll up a new one. So you can do that. And that's pretty much about it. You can go to the temple and get a blessing just before you go into a fight, if you so desire. Spend a little bit of gold on that. You notice there's that big ugly plus next to it. You can buy gold in-game, because, hey, we're on iOS. Oh, iOS disease is what I'd bloody well call that. They are so cash-hungry. It's ridiculous. Absolutely absurd. Let's go to the temple again. Spend 50 gold. Do we get anything? Again, it's all random nonsense. Nothing! Great. Well, that was thoroughly pointless. Okay, let's go adventuring and show you how the game actually works outside of that. So we can jump into this one. This is a basic undead quest. I'll take my Witch Hunter along for this, because obviously they're pretty good at dealing with undead. In fact, they're gloriously overpowered when dealing with undead. So, we'll go with the Marauder, the Ironbreaker. We'll take the Bright Wizard along so I can show you the magic mechanics, and we'll bring the Witch Hunter. Sounds good. Okay. Alright. So, welcome to Warhammer Quest and what it actually is. So you've got this tile-based game here, whereby you move each character individually, and they've got, obviously, a set of movement. And you move between the tile sets by going to these arrows, and that will unveil a new tile. When you unveil a new tile, that more often than not involves unveiling enemies, which you'll immediately go into a fight with. So you want to be a little bit ready to move before you actually move on to the next room. Everyone's kind of close together here, so it looks like we're not going to encounter an enemy this time around. Usually you want to keep your warriors at the front. Characters can't walk past each other, so you've got to be a little bit careful about that. I've actually blocked off this area now. So if we move forward a little bit more, we can move the Bright Wizard in at the back, so you get your nice little 2x2 square formation there. And once the turn is over, you click off the characters and click End Turn. And then you move again. It's really that simple. And I made a mistake there by opening the next room. I'm probably going to encounter a bunch of stuff. That's fine. Okay, well, it's alright. We can get our 2 warriors at the front. So, combat. Extremely simple. You click on the enemy. This is the number of attacks that you've got down here. My Ironbreaker has 1, so he's going to attack, and he misses. Alright, and that's pretty much it. Annoyingly enough, it doesn't actually show you the dice roll, which I think would be very nice, because it helps to really understand the way that the combat system works. This game has a very, very basic system, as a lot of the Warhammer games do. And Warhammer is actually quite easy to understand compared to other tabletop games. It uses a lot of d6 rolling, and this game is no exception, but it hides all of that under the hood, which I think is a little bit unnecessary. Alright, we're going to unleash an ability, Bane of Undead, ludicrously powerful, uses the willpower stat, which is unique to the Witch Hunter, and willpower is something that you gain by doing damage, you lose it by your allies taking damage and dying. And in fact, if you use it too much, you can get a debuff called Shaken Will, which if I double-click and hold, it'll say minus stats, basically. Weapon skill, ballistic skill, strength. All of that sounds great, with the exception of the fact that since you don't see any of the dice rolls, all of those numbers are, frankly, irrelevant. So that's a little bit silly. Now, the other thing that you can do with a wizard is you can use the Winds of Magic. Now, these are randomly determined. Yeah. They actually are. So, your wizard can actually go through several turns of being utterly useless. In this case, he only has 2 Winds of Magic. None of my spells are that cheap. So he just sits there being a moron. And you can hit with the sword, but it does basically no damage whatsoever. So that's great. Again, it's a very archaic game mechanic. It's very random, and it's the sort of thing that kind of works in a tabletop setting, because you can all kind of have a little bit of a giggle about it, and it really increases the tension. Because in the tabletop setting, well, you're playing with others. It's really that simple. You are each controlling a character, and it's a cooperative action RPG. The problem is, with this version of the game, you're not playing with others. It's just you playing. And as it turns out, that is not actually as interesting at all. You're dealing with these arcane, fairly archaic game mechanics, and combat, which is, frankly, lackluster and a little bit dull, and I think would be a little bit better if it was at least showing the dice rolls under the hood so you could at least understand how things work, but it really doesn't. Now, most of the strategy in this game, it involves movement. It involves, well, where am I going to go? Can I move into a place where I have the potential to proc the Death Blow ability, which will let me take another free swing at something which is adjacent to me? Can I make sure that I don't block off my character and all that kind of stuff? Yeah. That's pretty much the extent of the strategy, and a lot of the other stuff is determined almost by random chance. I mean, you can have things like the pistol of the Witch Hunter jam for no apparent reason, and obviously with the wizards it's the most obvious, because if you don't get the right amount of Winds of Magic, then your wizard is essentially useless for an entire turn. All of this sounds great on paper, or indeed on table. This is the sort of thing that you can deal with in a tabletop game. It's the sort of thing that you expect. In a PC game, it's a lot harder to justify. And I think that if you are going to adapt a game like this, you've got to adapt it, not clone it just whole cloth. Which is what this is. You know, they basically Xeroxed the damn thing. And I don't think that you should do that. I think you need to change things around. This is a very similar criticism that I brought against Space Hulk. And I think that it was a valid criticism, and I think that the justification for it being a valid criticism is that the company that made it decided to make a new version called, I think it was Ascended Edition, where they completely changed the mechanics around and they made it more like an actual PC game. They put RPG-style progression in there, they completely reworked the way that a lot of the mechanics actually operated and made it more like a PC strategy game. And it was a lot better for it. That game is significantly better than the original. The problem with Warhammer Quest is that it did what Space Hulk did in the first place, which is it just took the game mechanics from the tabletop game and said, this'll be fine. And yet, no, it won't. I don't think it is at all. I think what you've got here is a very simplistic action RPG. Well, it's not even an action RPG. I don't even know why I'm saying that. It's a turn-based RPG, really. I suppose I'm calling it an action RPG because the mechanics are so simplistic that they remind me of one. And I'm afraid this game is coasting through on nostalgia, really. It's not actually got a great deal going for it. I mean, for one thing, the animation qualities, if you notice, is very, very poor. Up until the point where the pistol of the witch hunter doesn't even point at the target it's shooting at. He just kind of waves it in the vague direction of the target, and bullets come out of what appears to be his hand, as opposed to the actual pistol. I mean, come on, you're charging $3 for the character. The least you could do is animate it properly. It's just kind of ridiculous. And I suppose you could argue, well, they were going for a tabletop style. Well, if you're going to go for a tabletop style, actually do that. Like, make the miniatures look like miniatures. Have them move around and, like, bounce around. That would give it an interesting style, I think. Like, have a disembodied hand come down and pick them up and move them. That would be kind of neat. But that's not what they did. They've got this weird hybrid between using the tile sets of the tabletop game, which are low resolution as hell, by the way. I mean, come on. Just have a look at that. I mean, the blood doesn't look very good, but it's the tile set that really bothers me. Look at that altar of bones, for instance. It's pixely. Like, it's not high resolution. It seems like the assets that they used from the mobile game have just been ported over. They didn't bother to up-res them at all. And you've got to imagine that the assets they originally created were higher resolution than this. And generally speaking, the original assets that you make are not downscaled. You don't do that. But, and downscaled is not the right word, by the way, at all. At all. They're not down-resed. Those would be the final ones. You're not talking about the originals that you create, but it seems like the ones that they've used here are, again, very low resolution. They're not good quality whatsoever, and they throw a couple of lighting effects in here and there, but they don't really reflect properly off everything, and they just make it blindingly obvious that these cracks in the floor are lower resolution than what the game is, and they look pixely. You know, it's really as simple as that. So, in terms of production value, there's really not a lot going on here either. And outside of that, what you're going to be doing is crawling dungeons. You're going to randomly encounter enemies, which can completely screw you, by the way. It's entirely possible. If a bunch of enemies spawn around my Bright Wizard, and the guys that are in range end up missing, and they end up attacking my Bright Wizard and just murdering him horribly, then none of the positioning that I've done really matters. I mean, have a look at where everything spawned here. These rats spawned at the back. So even if I had my Bright Wizard at the back, kind of out of the way, these rats could have spawned right next to him. And there's nothing I could have done about that. And since this is all dice-based, I could be very unlucky, as I am here. You know, I just missed. So he can't really do anything now. Let's see if we can at least deal with him. Okay, that's him gone, and we can take a shot. Have a look at that pistol, by the way. You see what I mean? And they're jammed randomly, so that's fun. I'm sorry, but these sort of mechanics are not enjoyable in a PC game. These are not the sort of things that I'm looking for. It's the same thing I said about Blood Bowl, it's the same thing I said about Space Hulk, and the same thing I said about Bloody Talisman. These are the sort of things that you can deal with in a social setting, because you're rolling physical dice, and there's a good degree of fun with that. There's nice physical feedback, and of course, you're laughing and having a good time with your friends, and if you roll poorly, that's fine. You know, everyone has a good laugh about it, and it adds to the tension of the game. When you're playing on your own, it's just frustrating. And I think what they should have done with Warhammer Quest is actually adapt it into an actual computer game. Not this. Now, this is just a single-player clone of a tabletop game, and frankly, it's not that enjoyable to play as a direct result of that. And that's a shame. Absolutely. The other thing they could have done is actually put multiplayer in it. That would have probably helped a bit. Or they could have added the ability to create your own dungeons. You know, that may have added some longevity to it, but I have no real desire to play this in single player. There's too much RNG going on. The combat is slow and clunky and lacks any real mechanical depth. It works, but that's all I can say. It hides way too much information under the hood for seemingly no apparent reason whatsoever. And you can get horribly screwed by random encounters through no fault of your own, and in a 20-minute run end up either dying or losing a party member who then doesn't gain any experience whatsoever. And that takes away from one of the more interesting parts of the game, which is the way that the characters progress. That's actually one of the big strengths of it. Each character has his own progression path and learns a bunch of interesting skills that really flesh him out and give him his own unique characteristics. I love that. That was the best thing about Warhammer Quest. That's why your characters felt personal. That's why I love the Chaos Warrior. He had his own little mutations. He was my Chaos Warrior. He had his little tentacles coming out of his arms, and he had horns and all that stuff. He was different to other Chaos Warriors because you rolled on random tables. It gave him that nice, unique sense of personality, and that's certainly the case when you own the miniature and you paint it up. You can see why I believe the Warhammer Quest back in the day was very compelling. And you can also see as a result that all of that is missing from the computerized version of Warhammer Quest, and what you're left with is a really slow, fairly dull and simplistic turn-based RPG dungeon crawler. And I'm sorry, but there's a lot of pretty damn good RPG dungeon crawlers available. And, well, this isn't one of them. And I've got to come back to the price point. $30 for all the content? $30! God, I mean, if I go through the list of RPGs that I could buy for $30 that would give me a significantly more enjoyable experience, I'd be here all bloody day. Like, come on. It's not exactly a difficult thing to understand. This is a hard sell at this price. And it really seems to be relying on nostalgia, because it hasn't adapted the game in an enjoyable way. It's just cloned the mechanics of a very old... I mean, it's pretty much a 20-year-old tabletop game at this point. It has no multiplayer at all, and a dodgy business model. I'm sorry, that I like Warhammer, but what they're doing to the franchise at the moment by handing this bloody thing out to anyone that wants it is really not becoming of a universe that I really, really love and enjoy. I'm feeling milked at this point. After Storm of Vengeance, after Carnage on iOS, thankfully less so on Space Wolf. That was actually pretty good, but a lot of real rubbish coming out in the Warhammer franchise, both in Warhammer Fantasy and 40,000. And unfortunately, while Quest is functional, it does what Quest is supposed to do. I'm afraid that in 2015 on PC as a single-player game, that's just not enough. Especially not when you're trying to charge that much for it. No, I can't recommend Warhammer Quest, I'm afraid. The nostalgia is not enough to keep me going. And frankly, it's making me wish that I could go back and play the tabletop game. Maybe I should see if I can acquire another copy and we can play that, because that was a bunch of fun. But then again, I was 13 at the time. My understanding of game mechanics was perhaps not quite as good as it is now, and maybe I've just grown out of Warhammer Quest. That's possible. But no, it's hard for me to recommend Warhammer Quest, I'm afraid. It's not very interesting. I find this game to be particularly dull, and I just don't think it's a good adaptation. It's too strict an adaptation. Take some creative license if you're going to take a game like this. Do what the guys over at Full Control did and do a better job. Take Space Hulk and say, look, we screwed up the first version. Let's make a better one, like they did with Ascension. And that's a much better game as a result. This... no. I'm not going to be playing any more of this, I'm afraid. Warhammer Quest, ladies and gentlemen, available for about $5 on iOS, which might be reasonable if you want to run some single-player questing while you're on the toilet, or $15 on Steam, which has a lot of other better RPGs that you could be playing instead. My name's been TotalBiscuit. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time.